The bullet tore through Samuel Kellerman's chest on a Tuesday morning in May of 1878, and his daughter Sara watched him die in the dusty street of St. George, Utah, while the man who shot him rode away laughing. She was 22 years old, and in the span of 3 minutes, everything she had ever known about safety disappeared like water through sand. Her father had been the town's blacksmith, a quiet man who worked hard and kept to himself after her mother died, giving birth to a stillborn son when Sara was 15. He had been walking to the general store to buy flour when Frank Bellamy, drunk and mean as always, decided Samuel had looked at him wrong the week before. The sheriff did nothing. Frank's brother owned half the cattle in the territory, and justice bent for men with money and guns. Sara knelt in the dirt beside her father's body, her calico dress soaking up his blood, and something inside her turned to iron. The townspeople gathered around, their faces full of pity that would not put food on her table or keep the rain off her head. Mrs. Henderson tried to pull her away, but Sara shook her off. She stayed there until her father's hand went cold in hers, and then she stood up and walked home alone. The small house behind the blacksmith shop felt cavernous without her father's presence. Sara sat at the kitchen table as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, trying to think practically about her situation, even as grief threatened to drown her. She had $23 saved, no living relatives, and no marketable skills beyond keeping house. Women alone in territories like Utah had limited options, and most of them were grim. She could try to run the blacksmith shop herself, but no man would bring his horse or his tools to a woman. She could take in washing or sewing, but St. George had more women needing work than work to be done. She could marry, but the only men who had shown interest were the kind who saw a young woman alone as an opportunity for something she would never willingly give. The knock on her door came as twilight painted the desert purple and gold. Sara answered it with her father's pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt, though she had never fired it and was not entirely sure she could. The man standing on her porch was not from St. George. She would have remembered him. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His eyes were the color of creek water, green-brown and clear, and they looked at her with a directness that was neither threatening nor familiar. He held his hat in his hands and stood well back from the door, as though he understood she might be frightened. "Miss Kellerman," he said, and his voice was low and even. "My name is Ryder Kane. I worked with your father some years back, when I was breaking horses for the Army over at Fort Douglas. I just heard about what happened. I am sorrowful for your loss." Sara studied him, trying to place the name in her father's past. Her father had worked at Fort Douglas in the late 60s, before they had moved to St. George. She had been a child then, but she had vague memories of soldiers and horses and her father coming home smelling of coal smoke and metal. "Thank you," she said carefully, not inviting him in. "That is kind of you to say." Ryder Kane shifted his weight, his hat turning in his hands. "I also heard that Frank Bellamy is not going to hang for what he did. His brother's seeing to that." "The sheriff says there were no witnesses," Sara said, and her voice came out flat and hard, "even though 20 people saw him do it. I figured that might be how it went." Ryder Kane looked past her into the house, then back at her face. "Miss Kellerman, I am going to speak plain because I do not think you have time for anything else. A woman alone in a town like this, after what happened, you are not safe. Frank Bellamy is mean, and men like him do not like being looked at with the kind of hate you probably gave him today. He will come for you, or his friends will, just to prove they can." Sara's hand tightened on the pistol through her skirt. "Are you here to threaten me, Mr. Kane?" "No, madam. I am here to offer you a way out." He met her eyes steadily. "I have a ranch about 30 miles north of here, up in the hill country, where the cedar grows thick and the water runs year-round. It is not much, just a few hundred acres and some cattle, but it is mine free and clear. I need help running it. I am looking for someone to keep house and help with the work. It would be proper. You would have your own room, your own space. I would pay you fair wages and make sure you were safe." "You want to hire me as your housekeeper," Sara said slowly. "A woman you do not know, whose father you worked with a decade ago. I want to give you an option that is not marrying some man you do not love or waiting for Frank Bellamy to decide you need teaching," Ryder said, and there was something fierce underneath his calm tone. "Your father was good to me when I was young and stupid and did not know a damn thing about horses or honor. He taught me how to do the work right, And he never made me feel small for not knowing. I owe him a debt. Let me pay it by making sure his daughter has a safe place to land." Sara wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him she did not need charity or rescue, that she could take care of herself. But the words stuck in her throat because they would have been lies. She was not safe. She could feel it in the way the townspeople had looked at her that afternoon, a mixture of pity and relief that it was her and not them. She could feel it in the silence from the sheriff's office, in the way Frank Bellamy's laughter still echoed in her ears. "I do not know you," she said finally. "How do I know you are not worse than what I would be running from?" Ryder Kane nodded, as though he had expected the question. "You do not. All I can tell you is that I have never raised my hand to a woman. I do not drink more than a single glass on Saturday nights, and I keep my word once I give it. I am offering you honest work for honest pay, in a place where Frank Bellamy and his brother cannot reach you. But if you want to stay here and take your chances, that is your right. I will not press you." He put his hat back on and turned to go, and Sara felt panic flutter in her chest. She did not want to go with this stranger, but she did not want to stay in St. George either. She did not want to sleep in this house tonight, wondering if Frank Bellamy would come through her door drunk and angry. She did not want to stand in the general store tomorrow and see people look away from her, too afraid to stand up for what was right. "Wait," she said, and Ryder Kane stopped on the steps. "If I come with you and I do not like it, you will bring me back, or to another town where I can find work. You will give me that promise." He turned to face her, and something that might have been respect crossed his features. "You have my word on it, Miss Kellerman. Any time you want to leave, I will take you where you want to go and give you 2 months' wages to help you start over." "Then I will come," Sara said, before she could talk herself out of it. "Give me an hour to pack." She gathered her few possessions into 2 carpet bags and a trunk: her mother's wedding quilt, her father's pocket watch, the 3 dresses she owned, her Bible, and the collection of dime novels she kept hidden under her mattress. She packed her mother's recipes written in fading ink, her father's shaving mug, the sampler she had stitched as a girl, everything that mattered, everything that was left. Ryder Kane loaded her trunk onto his wagon without comment. He had brought supplies from town, sacks of flour and cornmeal, coffee and sugar, bolts of fabric. Sara climbed onto the wagon seat beside him as the last light faded from the sky, and they rolled out of St. George, heading north into the darkness. They did not speak for the first hour. Sara sat rigid on the seat, one hand gripping the edge of the wagon, watching the shadows for pursuers. Every sound made her jump. Every shift of the wind brought Frank Bellamy's face back to her mind, his eyes cold and empty as he pointed his gun at her father's chest. "No one is following," Ryder said quietly, as though he could read her thoughts. "We are clear of town, and there is no reason for anyone to track where you went tonight." "You do not know that," Sara said. Her voice shook, despite her best efforts to control it. "You are right. I do not." He kept his eyes on the road, giving her the privacy of her fear. "But I am a good tracker, and I have been watching our back trail. We are alone out here." The moon rose full and bright, turning the desert into a landscape of silver and shadow. They followed a rough track through sagebrush and juniper, climbing gradually into country where the air smelled of cedar and pine. Sara had rarely been outside St. George, and never at night like this. The vastness of the land pressed in on her, beautiful and terrifying at once. "Tell me about your ranch," she said finally, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own racing thoughts. Ryder glanced at her, then back at the trail. "It is not much to tell. I bought the land 5 years ago with money I saved from the army and from breaking horses. There is a cabin, 2 rooms, and a loft. A barn for the horses and cattle. A chicken coop, though the coyotes got most of the chickens last month. A good well and a creek that runs even in summer. The nearest neighbor is 10 miles east, a family named Morrison. They are decent people." "Why do you live out there alone?" Sara asked. "Most men want to be closer to town." "Most men like people more than I do." There was something in his tone that suggested old wounds. "I spent enough time in the army taking orders and sleeping in barracks full of snoring men. I wanted space and quiet. I wanted to build something that was mine. And now you are giving up your quiet to bring a stranger into your home." Ryder was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a washout in the trail. "Your father once told me that a man's worth is not measured in what he builds for himself, but in what he is willing to share with others. I have been thinking about that a lot these past few years, thinking maybe I took the lesson about building, but forgot the one about sharing. Sara did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They rode on through the night, stopping once to rest the horses and eat cold biscuits and dried beef from Ryder's saddlebags. He moved around the camp with easy efficiency, tending the horses, checking the wagon wheels, scanning the darkness with a practiced eye. He had built a small fire despite the warm night, and Sara realized it was for her comfort, not his need. "You should try to sleep a few hours," he said, nodding toward the bedroll he had spread near the fire. "We will not reach the ranch until midday tomorrow, and you look like you have not slept in a week." "I cannot sleep," Sara said. She sat hugging her knees, staring into the flames. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him falling." Ryder poured coffee from a battered pot and handed her a tin cup. He settled on the other side of the fire, far enough away to be respectful, close enough that she did not feel alone. "The first man I saw die was at Sand Creek," he said quietly. "I was 18, and I thought I knew what war looked like. I did not know anything." He stared into his own cup, his face shadowed. "It took me a long time to learn how to sleep again after that. How to close my eyes without seeing things I did not want to see." "How did you do it?" Sara asked. "Learn to sleep again. I told myself that staying awake would not bring them back, that punishing myself would not change what happened, that the only way to honor the dead was to keep living, and living means sleeping and eating and getting up the next day." He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I also had to learn that I did not have to forget in order to move forward. The memories do not go away. You just get stronger at carrying them." Sara felt tears burn in her throat, the first she had let herself feel since her father died. "I do not feel strong, I feel broken. Broken things can be mended," Ryder said. "Your father taught me that too. He could take a piece of metal that looked like nothing but scrap and turn it into something useful and beautiful. He told me once that the strongest blades are the ones that have been through the hottest fire. I think people are like that too." The tears came then, quiet and hot, sliding down Sara's cheeks. She did not try to stop them. Ryder did not look away or try to comfort her with empty words. He just sat with her while she cried, keeping watch over the fire and the darkness beyond it, a silent guardian against all the things that might come in the night. She did eventually sleep, curled in the bedroll with her father's pocket watch clutched in her hand. When she woke, the sun was climbing toward noon, and Ryder had the wagon packed and ready. He handed her a plate of beans and bacon, and she ate mechanically, tasting nothing. They reached the ranch an hour past midday. The cabin sat in a small valley surrounded by low hills, thick with cedar and pine. The creek Ryder had mentioned ran clear and quick about 50 yards from the house, lined with cottonwood trees that provided shade and green against the dry landscape. The cabin itself was solidly built, with a stone chimney and real glass in the windows. The barn was weathered but sturdy, and Sara could see horses in the corral beside it. "It is not much," Ryder said again, climbing down from the wagon. "But it is sound." Sara stepped down, her legs stiff from the long ride. She looked around at the valley, at the way the light fell through the trees, at the mountains rising blue and distant to the north. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. It was also the most isolated place she had ever seen. "Where is the town?" she asked. Cedar Springs is about 15 miles east. It is small, just a general store and a saloon and a few houses. We go there once a month for supplies. Ryder began unloading her trunk. "I know it is lonely out here. That is something you should understand before you decide to stay." Lonely seemed like a vast understatement, but Sara found she did not mind as much as she thought she would. After the horror of yesterday, after watching her father die in front of half of St. George while no one lifted a hand to help, the idea of being far from other people had a certain appeal. Ryder showed her inside. The cabin was clean and simply furnished. A table and chairs, a cook stove, a rocking chair near the fireplace, shelves lined with books. One of the 2 rooms on the ground floor was clearly his. The other was empty except for a bed frame. "I will get a mattress made up for you," he said. "For tonight you can take my bed, and I will sleep in the loft." "I cannot take your bed," Sara protested. "Yes, you can. I have slept in worse places than a loft." His tone left no room for argument. "There is a trunk in the corner with some things that belong to my mother, quilts and such. You are welcome to use whatever you need." "Your mother lived here?" She died before I bought this place, but I kept some of her things. He looked uncomfortable, as though he had revealed more than he intended. I will bring in your trunk and then tend to the horses. Take your time settling in. Sara spent the afternoon unpacking and exploring. The cabin had a pantry stocked with staples, a root cellar that stayed cool even in summer, a back porch with a pump and a washing tub. She found Ryder's mother's trunk and opened it carefully, feeling like an intruder. Inside were beautiful quilts stitched in patterns of stars and flowers, embroidered pillowcases, tablecloths edged with lace. There was also a wedding dress wrapped in muslin, yellowed with age but still lovely. She made up the bed in the empty room with one of the quilts and her own sheets. She unpacked her dresses and hung them on pegs along the wall. She set her mother's Bible on the small table beside the bed, and her father's pocket watch next to it. When she was done, the room looked less empty, but still sparse. It did not feel like home yet. She wondered if it ever would. Ryder came in at sunset, smelling of horses and hay. Sara had found chicken eggs in the coop and made scrambled eggs with bacon and biscuits from the supplies he had bought in town. It was simple food, but Ryder ate like it was a feast. "This is good," he said, surprised. "Really good." "Did you think I could not cook?" Sara asked, and for a moment she almost smiled. "I did not know. You could have burned the eggs, and I would have eaten them anyway, after making you come all this way." He sopped up the last of his eggs with a biscuit. "But I am glad you can cook. I am tired of my own beans and bacon." They fell into an awkward silence. Sara washed the dishes while Ryder sat at the table, clearly uncertain about what to do or say. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I know this is strange," he said. "You do not know me, and I do not really know you, and we are going to be living under the same roof. So I think we should set some ground rules, just so everything is clear and proper." Sara dried her hands on a towel and turned to face him. "All right. You have your room, I have mine. Neither of us goes into the other's space without invitation. You are not my servant, you are my employee. That means we split the work fair. I will handle the stock and the heavy labor. You manage the house and the cooking. But if you need help with something, you ask, and if I need help, I will do the same." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I will not touch you without permission. I will not come into your room at night. I will treat you with respect, and I expect the same in return. If I do something that makes you uncomfortable, you tell me straight out, and I will fix it. And like I promised, if you want to leave, I will take you anywhere you want to go. Does that sound fair?" "It sounds more than fair," Sara said quietly. "Thank you. You do not need to thank me for treating you like a human being. That is just basic decency." Ryder stood and carried his plate to the wash basin. "I am going to check on the horses one more time, then turn in. You should get some rest. Tomorrow I will show you around the place proper, and we will figure out a routine." Sara lay awake in the unfamiliar bed that night, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the creek murmuring over stones, the wind in the pines, a coyote howling somewhere far off, the creak of floorboards as Ryder moved around in the loft above her. It should have been frightening, this isolation, this dependence on a man she barely knew. Instead, she felt something she had not expected to feel again so soon. She felt the faint, fragile beginning of safety. The days developed a rhythm. Sara woke at dawn and made coffee and breakfast while Ryder tended the animals. They ate together, speaking little, then went about their separate tasks. She learned to manage the chickens and gather eggs, to work the kitchen garden that Ryder had planted but not maintained, to do the washing and baking and endless small chores that kept a household running. He worked with the horses and cattle, mended fences, hauled water, chopped wood for the winter they would not see together if she chose to leave. At first they circled each other like wary animals, speaking only when necessary, maintaining careful distance. But slowly, gradually, the walls began to lower. Ryder started telling her about the horses, which ones were stubborn and which were gentle, which ones he was training for sale and which he would keep. Sara found herself talking about her father, about the blacksmith shop and the way St. George had changed over the years, about her mother and the brother she had never known. 2 weeks after her arrival, a rattlesnake got into the chicken coop and killed 3 hens. Sara found it coiled in the nesting boxes, its rattle buzzing a warning, and she froze. She had seen rattlesnakes before, but never this close, never in an enclosed space with no clear escape. Her breath came short and panicked, and she backed away slowly, trying not to make sudden movements. "Sara!" Ryder's voice came from behind her. Do not move." She heard his footsteps, measured and calm. Then he was beside her, a hoe in his hands. In one quick, decisive motion, he struck the snake behind its head, severing the spine. The rattlesnake thrashed briefly and went still. Ryder used the hoe to lift it out of the coop and fling it into the brush. "Are you bit?" he asked, turning to her with sharp concern. Sara shook her head. Her hands were trembling, and she clenched them into fists to hide it. "No, I could not move." "That is smart. Moving is what gets you struck." He set the hoe aside and looked at her closely. "You are shaking." "I am fine," Sara said, but her voice betrayed her. "You are not fine. Come on." Ryder guided her out of the coop and over to the pump, where he filled a dipper with cold water and handed it to her. "Drink this. It helps with shock." Sara drank, spilling some down the front of her dress because her hands would not steady. Ryder took the dipper from her and set it aside, then did something unexpected. He put his hands on her shoulders, not gripping, just resting there, warm and solid. "You are safe," he said quietly, holding her gaze. "The snake is dead, and you are safe." Sara nodded, but she could not stop shaking. The fear had unlocked something deeper, older. It was not just the rattlesnake. It was her father falling in the street. It was Frank Bellamy's laughter. It was every moment in the past 2 weeks when she had felt the ground shift beneath her feet, when she had remembered that safety was an illusion, that everything could be taken away in an instant. "I cannot stop," she whispered. "I cannot make it stop." Ryder pulled her into his arms without asking permission, holding her against his chest while she shook apart. His heart beat steady under her ear, and his hands were gentle on her back, and for the first time since her father died, Sara let herself fall to pieces in front of another person. She cried for her father and for her lost home. She cried for the girl she had been 2 weeks ago, who still believed the world made sense. She cried for the fear that had been eating at her in the dark, the terror that she would never feel safe again, that she would spend the rest of her life waiting for the next bad thing to happen. Ryder did not tell her to stop crying or to be strong. He just held her, one hand moving in slow circles on her back, and let her break. When the tears finally ran dry, Sara pulled back, embarrassed. Her face was hot, and she knew her eyes must be swollen and red. "I am sorry. I should not have—" "Do not apologize," Ryder said firmly. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture achingly tender. "You have every right to fall apart. You have been holding yourself together for weeks while your whole world came down around you. It is all right to let someone else hold you up for a while." "You barely know me," Sara said, but she did not step away from the warmth of his hands. "I know you well enough to see that you are carrying weight you should not have to carry alone." His eyes searched hers. "I told you I would be a safe place for you until you felt safe again on your own. Let me be that. Please." Sara did not know what to say to that, so she just nodded. Ryder released her slowly, giving her time to steady herself. Then he went back to the chicken coop and buried the dead hens while Sara sat on the porch steps, watching him work and feeling something shift inside her chest. That night, she could not sleep. Every creak of the cabin sounded like a rattlesnake. Every shadow looked like a threat. Finally, around midnight, she got up and walked out onto the porch, needing air and space and the reassurance of open sky. Ryder was sitting on the porch steps, a rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. "Could not sleep either?" Sara asked quietly. He turned unsurprised. "I heard you moving around. I thought you might come out, so I figured I would keep watch." "You do not need to do that." "I know I do not need to. I want to." He patted the step beside him. "Sit with me a while. The quiet helps." Sara sat, careful to leave space between them. The night was cool and clear, the stars scattered thick across the sky. She could hear the creak in the wind and the small sounds of the nocturnal world waking up. "I feel foolish," she said after a while, falling apart over a snake. "It was not really about the snake," Ryder said. "It was about everything else. The snake was just what broke the dam." He set the rifle aside and leaned back on his elbows, looking up at the stars. "I did that too, after Sand Creek. Held myself together for months, acting like I was fine. Then one day, a horse shied away from me, and I sat down in the dirt and cried like a child. My sergeant found me and told me I was not weak for breaking down. He said I was strong for holding it together as long as I did, and smart for finally letting it out. "Were you really at Sand Creek?" Sara asked, not sure if she wanted to know the answer. "I was. Not as a soldier, though. I was hired on as a scout because I grew up out here and knew the territory. I was supposed to guide the troops to a Cheyenne war camp." His voice went flat and distant. "But it was not a war camp. It was families, women and children and old men. And Colonel Chivington did not care. He ordered the attack anyway, and I could not stop it. I tried, I shouted and I argued, and I got knocked down for my trouble. Then I had to watch while they killed people who had already surrendered, who were flying white flags, who were begging for mercy." Sara looked at him, seeing him differently now. "That is why you left the army. That is why I left the army, and why I do not go into towns much, and why I live out here where I do not have to look at people and wonder what they are capable of when someone in authority tells them it is all right." He closed his eyes. "I know what it is like to see something you cannot unsee. To learn that the world is not what you thought it was. To realize that you are never going to feel safe the way you did before. But you said I would feel safe again," Sara said, her voice small. "You promised." "Not the same kind of safe," Ryder said gently. "That is gone, but you will find a different kind, a stronger kind. The kind that comes from knowing the world is dangerous and choosing to live in it anyway. The kind that comes from finding people you trust, to watch your back and letting them." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "I cannot make you feel safe, Sara, but I can be someone you trust. I can be someone who keeps his word and does not let you down. I can be a place you come back to when the world gets too big and too scary. And maybe, in time, that will be enough." Sara felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot she had not realized she was holding. "Why are you doing this? Really, it cannot just be because of my father." Ryder was quiet for a long moment. "When I came back from Sand Creek, I was a mess. I could not sleep, could not eat, could not stand to be around people. I drifted for a couple years, working odd jobs, staying drunk more often than not. Then I ended up at Fort Douglas, and your father hired me to help in the forge. He did not ask questions about where I had been or why I flinched at loud noises. He just put me to work and taught me the trade and gave me something to focus on besides the noise in my head." He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers. "One day I showed up late and still half drunk, and he sat me down and told me something I have never forgotten. He said that the world breaks everybody, but some people get stronger in the broken places. He said I had a choice. I could let what happened at Sand Creek destroy me, or I could use it to become someone better. Someone who stood up for people who could not stand up for themselves. Someone who created more good than harm." Sara heard her father's voice in those words, the gentle firmness that had guided her through her childhood. "He said something similar to me after my mother died. That grief could make me bitter, or it could make me kind, and the choice was mine. He was a wise man," Ryder said, "and he saved my life. So when I heard what happened to him, and that his daughter was alone and in danger, I did not even have to think about it. I got on my horse and I rode to St. George because it was the only way I knew how to repay him, by making sure you had what he gave me, a chance to heal and a safe place to do it." They sat together on the porch steps as the night deepened, and Sara felt something she had not expected. She felt grateful, not just for the rescue or the roof over her head, but for Ryder's honesty, for his willingness to share his own wounds so she did not feel so alone in hers. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me that, for being honest." "You deserve honesty," Ryder said. "You have had too many people lie to you lately, the sheriff, the townspeople who saw what happened and said nothing. You deserve better." "So do you," Sara said, surprising herself. "You deserve better than to live out here alone, hiding from a world that hurt you." Ryder smiled, small and crooked. "Maybe we are both getting what we deserve, a chance to stop hiding and start healing, together." The word hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Together, not alone, not anymore. Summer came on strong and hot, turning the valley into a furnace during the middle of the day. Sara and Ryder adjusted their routine, working in the early mornings and late evenings, resting during the worst heat. They began taking their meals on the porch, where the breeze from the creek made the temperature bearable. Sara found herself watching Ryder when he was not looking. The way he moved, economical and sure, The way he gentled the horses with patience and soft words. The way he checked on her throughout the day, making sure she had water and shade, that she was not working too hard. He was nothing like the men she had known in St. George, the ones who talked loud and made demands and expected women to serve them. Ryder was quiet strength, steady kindness, a rock in the chaos her life had become. She realized she was falling for him on a Tuesday in June, exactly 1 month after her father's death. They were working together in the garden, weeding the rows of beans and squash. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange, and Ryder was telling her a story about a horse he had trained for a cavalry officer, a mare so smart she could unlatch gates and steal apples from the mess hall. Sara was laughing, really laughing for the first time in weeks, when she looked over and found Ryder watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. There was warmth in his eyes, and longing, and something that looked almost like wonder. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "I like your laugh," Ryder said simply. "I was starting to think I would never hear it." "I did not think I would ever make that sound again," Sara admitted. She sat back on her heels, pushing hair out of her face. "But being here, with you, it feels like maybe I can still find joy in things. Small things. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Ryder reached across the row of beans and took her hand, dirt and all. "Sara, I need to tell you something, and I do not want you to feel obligated or pressured, but I also do not want to be dishonest with you." Sara's heart began to race. "All right. I did come to St. George to help you because of your father. That is true. But I am not keeping you here out of obligation." He held her gaze, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "I am keeping you here because I want you here. Because in the past month, you have become the best part of my days. Because I wake up looking forward to coffee with you on the porch and go to sleep grateful that you are safe under my roof. Because I think I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that." Sara could not breathe. No one had ever said anything like that to her before, with such simple honesty, such vulnerability. "Ryder, you do not have to say anything back," he said quickly. "I know the timing is wrong. I know you are still grieving your father and finding your feet. I am not asking you for anything. I just could not keep it inside anymore. I needed you to know." Sara looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, calloused from work and gentle despite their strength. She thought about the past month, about the way Ryder had kept every promise he made, the way he had given her space when she needed it and comfort when she could not ask. She thought about the way her heart lifted when she heard his step on the porch, the way she found excuses to stay near him, the way his smile made her feel warm all over. "I think I am falling for you too," she whispered. "It scares me. Everything scares me now. But when I am with you, the fear is not as loud." Ryder's face transformed, hope and joy chasing away the worry. "Can I kiss you?" Sara nodded, not trusting her voice. Ryder leaned across the bean plants, careful not to crush them, and kissed her softly. His lips were warm and tasted of coffee and summer dust, and Sara felt something inside her chest crack open, letting light flood in. When they pulled apart, Ryder was grinning like a fool. "That was worth getting dirt all over my knees." Sara laughed, giddy and dizzy. "We should probably finish weeding before it gets too dark to see." "Practical woman," Ryder teased, but he picked up his trowel and went back to work, still smiling. They finished the garden as the stars came out, stealing glances at each other like teenagers, and Sara felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt happy. The happiness was fragile at first, something Sara held carefully, afraid it would shatter if she gripped too tight. She and Ryder moved around each other with new awareness, the air between them charged with possibility. He started finding excuses to touch her, a hand on her back when he passed behind her in the kitchen, fingers brushing hers when they both reached for the coffee pot. A quick squeeze of her shoulder when she looked sad. Sara found herself doing the same, leaning into him when they sat together in the evenings, letting her hand rest on his arm when they talked, standing close enough to feel his warmth. They were courting, she realized, even though they were already living together, learning each other slowly, carefully, building trust and affection, brick by brick. But the past was not done with her yet. In July, Ryder rode to Cedar Springs for supplies, and Sara stayed at the ranch to do the washing and tend the garden. She was hanging sheets on the line when she heard horses approaching. For a moment, her heart lifted, thinking Ryder had come back early. Then she heard the laughter, rough and familiar, and her blood turned to ice. 3 men rode into the yard, and Frank Bellamy was in the lead. Sara dropped the sheet she was holding and ran for the house, but Frank was faster. He spurred his horse forward and cut her off, his mount dancing sideways to block her path. "Well, well," Frank said, grinning down at her. "Little Sara Kellerman, we have been looking for you." Sara backed away, her mind racing. The rifle was inside the house. So was the pistol. She had nothing but her own 2 hands and the knowledge that no one would hear her scream out here. "How did you find me?" she asked, stalling. "Your landlord in St. George mentioned seeing you ride out with some cowboy. We asked around until someone remembered Ryder Kane talking about a ranch north of town." Frank dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. "Took us a while to find this place, but here we are." "What do you want?" Sara demanded, though she already knew. "You know what I want." Frank took a step toward her, and his 2 companions fanned out to either side. "You looked at me wrong after I shot your daddy. Made me feel like maybe you were thinking about telling the law a different story than the one I gave them. I do not like loose ends." "I have not told anyone anything," Sara said, still backing away. Her heel hit the porch steps and she stumbled. "I left St. George. I am not coming back. There is no loose end." "See, I do not believe you." Frank pulled his gun, not pointing it at her yet, just holding it casually. "I think you are going to wait a few months, then ride back and make trouble for me. Women are funny that way. They hold grudges." "She is not going to tell anyone anything." The voice came from behind the barn, and Sara's heart leaped. Ryder walked into the open, his own rifle raised and aimed at Frank's chest. "Because she does not need to. I saw what you did. I was in St. George buying supplies the day you shot Samuel Kellerman in the street. I saw the whole thing." Frank's eyes narrowed. "You are lying." "I am not. You rode up drunk and yelling about how Kellerman had disrespected you. He tried to walk away, and you shot him in the back. Then you turned him over and shot him again in the chest to make sure he was dead. You were laughing." Ryder's voice was cold and steady. "I did not say anything at the time because I did not know Sara yet, and I was afraid your brother would make my life hell. But I am not afraid anymore. You touch her, and I ride straight to the territorial marshal in Salt Lake City and give a full statement. Your brother's money does not reach that far." Frank's face twisted with rage. "You think you can threaten me?" "I am not threatening. I am promising." Ryder took a step forward, his rifle never wavering. "You have a choice. You can ride out of here right now and never come back, and I will keep my mouth shut. Or you can try something stupid, and I will make sure you hang for murder. What is it going to be?" The moment stretched out, taut and dangerous. Frank's gun was in his hand, and his companions had their own weapons. Sara could see the calculations running behind Frank's eyes, the weighing of risks and pride. Finally, Frank holstered his gun. "This is not over." "Yeah, it is," Ryder said. "Because if I see you or your friends anywhere near this ranch again, I am not going to bother with the marshal. I am just going to shoot you. Now, get off my land." Frank mounted his horse, his face dark with fury. "She is not worth dying for, Kane." "That is where you are wrong." Ryder's voice was quiet but absolute. "Now ride." Frank wheeled his horse and galloped out of the yard, his companions following. Sara watched them disappear into the trees, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and terror. When she could no longer hear hoofbeats, her knees gave out. Ryder caught her before she hit the ground, gathering her into his arms. "I have got you. You are safe." "How did you get back so fast?" Sara gasped. "You should still be in Cedar Springs." "I saw them on the trail, recognized Frank from St. George. I circled around through the hills and came in from the back." Ryder carried her into the house and set her gently on the rocking chair. "I am sorry I did not get here sooner. I am sorry you had to face him at all." "You saved me," Sara said, grabbing his hand. "Again." "You would have saved yourself," Ryder said. "You are tougher than you think. He is going to come back." The fear was rising again, threatening to drown her. "He is not going to let this go." "Then we will deal with it." Ryder knelt in front of her, his hands on her knees. "Sara, listen to me. I meant what I said out there. You are worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth everything, and I am not going to let Frank Bellamy or anyone else hurt you." "You cannot watch over me every second of every day," Sara said, "and I do not want to live like that, always afraid, always looking over my shoulder." "You are right. We need to end this." Ryder stood and began pacing, thinking out loud. I am going to ride to Salt Lake City and talk to the territorial marshal. I will give a statement about what I saw in St. George. They will investigate, and with my testimony, they will have enough to arrest Frank. His brother will make it disappear, Sara said hopelessly. Not if we make enough noise. Not if we get a lawyer involved and make sure the newspapers hear about it. Ryder stopped pacing and looked at her. Your father deserves justice, Sara, and you deserve to live without fear. Let me do this. Sara wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him it was too dangerous, that Frank's family was too powerful, that they should just run and keep running. But she was tired of running, tired of being afraid. And she believed Ryder when he said he would see this through. All right, she said, but I am coming with you. Sara, I am coming with you, she repeated, steel in her voice. He was my father. I have a right to see this through. Ryder studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. We leave in the morning. We will take the wagon, travel fast, and stay in public places. It is a 3-day trip each way. Can you be ready? I have been ready since the day he killed my father, Sara said. They left at dawn, the wagon packed with supplies and both of them armed. Ryder drove hard, stopping only to rest the horses, pushing to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. They camped off the main trail, keeping a fire small and taking turns on watch. Ryder taught Sara how to load and fire the rifle properly, how to aim and breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. You might never need it, he said, but if you do, I want you to be ready. Salt Lake City was bigger than any place Sara had ever been, a bustling town of wide streets and Mormon settlers building their Zion in the desert. Ryder went straight to the marshal's office while Sara waited in the wagon, her rifle across her knees. He was inside for over an hour, and when he came out, a tall man with a silver badge walked with him. Miss Kellerman, the marshal said, tipping his hat. I am Marshal Thomas Grant. Mr. Kane has told me about the murder of your father and the threats Frank Bellamy has made against you. I am going to need you to give a statement as well, if you are willing. Sara told her story in the marshal's office, every detail she could remember about that terrible morning. The marshal took notes, his face growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and exhaled slowly. This is not the first complaint we have had about Frank Bellamy or his brother, Marshal Grant said. But it is the first time we have had credible witnesses willing to testify. With your statements, I can issue a warrant for Frank's arrest. It will take me a week or so to get down to St. George with deputies, but I promise you, he will be brought to justice. What about his brother? Ryder asked. He is going to try to interfere. Let him try. This is federal territory, and I do not answer to local cattle barons. The marshal's eyes were hard. Frank Bellamy is going to hang for what he did. You have my word on that. They stayed in Salt Lake City for 3 days while the marshal made arrangements and drew up the legal paperwork. Ryder rented them a small room at a respectable boarding house, insisting Sara take the bed while he slept on the floor. They walked the streets during the day, seeing the Mormon temple under construction, the gardens and orchards the settlers had coaxed from the desert, the bustle of a city being born. On their last evening, Ryder took Sara to dinner at a small restaurant, the first time they had eaten a meal. They did not cook themselves in months. Over roast chicken and potatoes, Sara found herself thinking about the future. What happens after Frank is arrested? She asked. Will we have to testify at a trial? Probably, Ryder said. But the marshal said he thinks Frank will take a deal rather than face a jury. Either way, it will be over. And then what? Sara toyed with her fork. What happens to us? Ryder reached across the table and took her hand. That depends on what you want. You can stay at the ranch, keep working for me as we agreed, or you can take your wages and start over somewhere new, somewhere that does not have bad memories, or... He paused, his thumb rubbing across her knuckles. Or you could stay because you want to, not because you need to. Stay as my partner, my wife, if you will have me. Sara's heart stuttered. Are you asking me to marry you? I know it is too soon, Ryder said quickly. I know you need time to heal and figure out who you are without all this hanging over you. I am not asking for an answer now. I am just telling you that when you are ready. If you are ready, I would be honored to spend my life with you. Sara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not sad tears. I do not know who I am without the fear, she admitted. I have been running on terror and adrenaline for so long, I do not remember what it feels like to just exist without that weight on my chest. I need time to figure that out. I know, that is what I'm offering, time and space and a safe place to do the figuring. Ryder smiled, gentle and patient. I will be there when you are ready, Sara, however long it takes. What if I am never ready? Sara asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if I am too broken to love anyone properly? You are not broken, Ryder said firmly. You are healing, and I will love you through the healing, broken pieces and all, until you can see yourself the way I see you. Sara squeezed his hand, overwhelmed by the depth of his patience, his kindness. How did I get so lucky to have you find me? I think your father had a hand in it, Ryder said, looking out for you even after he was gone. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, Sara leaning against Ryder's shoulder as the wagon rolled through the summer landscape. For the first time since her father's death, she let herself think about the future, not with fear, but with cautious hope. True to his word, Marshal Grant arrived in St. George 2 weeks later with 4 deputies. They arrested Frank Bellamy at his brother's ranch and hauled him back to Salt Lake City in chains. His brother hired expensive lawyers, but it did no good. With Ryder's testimony and Sara's statement, and a dozen witnesses who suddenly found their courage once the marshal made it clear he would not tolerate intimidation, the case was solid. Frank Bellamy pleaded guilty to murder in exchange for life in prison instead of hanging. It was not perfect justice, but it was justice. And for Sara, it was enough. She and Ryder traveled back to Salt Lake City for the sentencing. Sara stood in the courtroom and looked Frank Bellamy in the eyes as the judge read his sentence, and she felt something release inside her. The fear that had been her constant companion for months finally began to fade. Afterwards, standing on the courthouse steps in the autumn sunshine, Sara turned to Ryder and said, I want to go home. To St. George? Ryder asked carefully. No, to the ranch. That is home now. Ryder's face broke into a smile that made her heart sing. Then, let us go home. The ride back to the ranch took 4 days, but Sara did not mind. She spent the journey watching the landscape change from city to farmland to wild country, and somewhere along the way, she realized the tightness in her chest was gone. She could breathe again. She could think about tomorrow without fear. When they crested the hill and saw the valley spread below them, the cabin with its stone chimney and the creek winding through the cottonwoods, Sara felt something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it. She felt safe, not because the danger was gone or because she had forgotten what had happened. She felt safe because she had survived the worst thing she could imagine, and she was still here. She had people who loved her and a place to belong. She had her own strength, hard-won and fierce. She felt safe because she had learned that safety was not the absence of danger. It was knowing you could face whatever came and come through on the other side. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Sara turned to Ryder and said, Ask me again. Ask you what? Ryder said, though his eyes suggested he knew exactly what she meant. Ask me to marry you. Ryder set down his coffee cup and took both her hands in his. Sara Kellerman, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Sara said, and the word felt like freedom. Yes, I will marry you. Ryder whooped and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around on the porch while she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly, and Sara kissed him back with all the love and hope and joy she had thought she would never feel again. They were married in November by a circuit preacher who came through Cedar Springs. The Morrisons and a few other neighbor families came to witness the ceremony, held in the cabin with the fireplace crackling and autumn light slanting through the windows. Sara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and Ryder wore his best shirt and looked at her like she hung the moon. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed her gently and whispered, I love you, Sara Kane. I love you too, Sara whispered back, and meant it with her whole heart. Their first winter together was cold and long, but Sara had never been happier. She and Ryder fell into new rhythms as husband and wife, learning each other's bodies and hearts with patience and wonder. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. They made love slowly and sweetly, discovering pleasure and intimacy together. Sara learned that Ryder sang when he worked with the horses, old army songs and ballads his mother had taught him, Ryder learned that Sara could not carry a tune to save her life, but hummed anyway when she was content. They learned to read each other's silences, to know when the other needed space or comfort, or just a hand to hold. In January, a blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days. They spent the time in bed, keeping warm under piles of quilts, talking and laughing and making plans for the spring. Ryder wanted to expand the herd, maybe buy some more horses to train and sell. Sara wanted to enlarge the garden and maybe get a milk cow. They talked about children, someday when they were ready, and what they would name them. "If we have a son, I want to name him Samuel," Sara said, her head on Ryder's chest. "After my father." "That is a good name," Ryder agreed, his fingers combing through her hair. "And if we have a daughter?" "Rose," Sara said, "after your mother." Ryder kissed the top of her head, too moved to speak. By the time spring came, Sara had changed. The fear that had defined her for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet strength that ran bone deep. She was no longer the girl who had fled St. George in the dark. She was a woman who had faced her demons and won. A woman who knew her own worth and her own power. She was safe, not because Ryder protected her, though he did, but because she had learned to protect herself. She could shoot straight and ride hard and stand her ground. She could look at the past without flinching and the future without fear. She had become the person her father always believed she could be. In May, exactly 1 year after her father's death, Sara and Ryder rode to St. George together. They visited his grave, which the townspeople had finally marked with a proper headstone. Sara laid wildflowers on the stone and told her father about her life, about Ryder and the ranch and the happiness she had found. "I am safe now, Papa," she whispered. "I found my way. I found someone who kept me safe until I could feel it for myself. And now I do. I feel safe and strong and loved. I hope that makes you proud." Ryder stood back, giving her privacy, but Sara reached for his hand and pulled him forward. "Papa, this is Ryder Kane. You knew him when he was young. He grew into a good man, the kind of man you wanted me to find. I love him, and he loves me, and we are building a good life together. Thank you for sending him to me, for teaching him the lessons that made him who he is, for raising me to be strong enough to survive what happened." They stood together by the grave for a long time, the desert wind warm on their faces. When they finally walked back to the wagon, Sara felt light, as though she had set down a burden she had been carrying for too long. They did not stay in St. George. There was nothing there for them but ghosts and bad memories. They rode back to the ranch, to the life they were building together, and Sara did not look back. Summer passed in a blur of work and joy. The garden flourished, producing more vegetables than they could eat. Ryder trained 3 young horses and sold them for good money to a rancher from Nevada. Sara learned to make cheese and butter from the milk cow they bought in June. They worked hard and laughed often, and fell into bed each night exhausted and content. In August, Sara realized she had missed her monthly time twice. She waited another month to be sure, then told Ryder over breakfast on a Sunday morning. "I am going to have a baby," she said, watching his face. Ryder went perfectly still, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "You are sure?" "I am sure." He set down the cup and came around the table, pulling her into his arms. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." Sara laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by joy and fear and love all mixed together. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ryder said. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with tears. "Sara, you have given me everything. A home, a family, a reason to believe in good things again. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Sara said, cupping his face in her hands. "You saved my life, Ryder Kane. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Ryder corrected. "You taught me how to let someone in again, how to trust and hope and believe in the future. We did that together." The pregnancy was not easy. Sara was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down, but Ryder was patient and attentive, bringing her dry toast and ginger tea, rubbing her back when she was ill, reassuring her that it would pass. And it did pass. By winter, Sara was blooming, her belly growing round and her face glowing with health. They spent the cold months preparing for the baby, building a cradle from pine wood, sewing tiny clothes, choosing names. "Samuel if it is a boy," Sara reminded him. "What if it is a girl?" Rose, Ryder said. We agreed on that. I know, but what if we want to save that name? Use it for a different daughter someday? Sara was sitting by the fire, knitting a blanket for the baby. What would you want instead? Sara thought for a moment. Grace. I think we should name her Grace. Grace Kane, Ryder tested the name. I like it. It suits. Grace if it is a girl, Samuel if it is a boy, Sara agreed. Perfect. The baby came in April, a month before what would have been Sara's father's 65th birthday. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Sara was certain she would not survive it. But Ryder stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, talking her through the pain. You can do this, he told her over and over. You are the strongest person I know. You can do this. And she did. At dawn, on a perfect spring morning, with the creek singing outside and the birds calling in the trees, Sara brought her son into the world. He came out squalling and healthy, with a thick cap of dark hair and his father's green-brown eyes. Samuel, Sara whispered, exhausted and elated. His name is Samuel. Ryder held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. Hello, Samuel. I am your papa, and that brave, beautiful woman there is your mama, and we are going to love you forever. Sara watched her husband with their baby, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. This was what safety looked like, not the absence of fear, but the presence of love. Not being protected from the world, but having someone to face it with. Not forgetting the past, but building a future strong enough to hold both the sorrow and the joy. 2 years later, they had another child, a daughter, just as they had hoped. They named her Rose, after Ryder's mother, and she was as beautiful as the flower she was named for. She had Sara's dark hair and Ryder's smile, and from the moment she was born, she had her brother Samuel wrapped around her tiny finger. The years passed in the way of good lives, full of small joys and ordinary miracles. Samuel grew tall and strong, learning to ride and rope and work the ranch alongside his father. Rose was a wild child, fearless and laughing, always getting into mischief. Ryder expanded the ranch, buying more land and more cattle, building their future one day at a time. Sara tended her garden and her children and her marriage, finding satisfaction in the simple rhythms of their life. They had 2 more children in the years that followed. Another son they named Thomas, after the marshal who had brought Frank Bellamy to justice. And finally, a daughter they called Grace, after all. On a summer evening when Sara was 35 years old, she sat on the porch of the ranch house watching her children play in the yard. Samuel was 15 now, nearly a man, teaching 8-year-old Thomas how to throw a rope. Rose, 13 and already beautiful, was braiding 5-year-old Grace's hair under the cottonwood tree by the creek. Ryder came out of the barn and crossed the yard to join her, settling into the rocking chair beside hers. He took her hand, their fingers lacing together with the ease of long practice. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, seeing the reflective look on her face. "I was thinking about the girl I was when I first came here," Sara said. "How scared I was, how broken, how sure I was that I would never feel safe again. And now I cannot imagine being anywhere else or with anyone else." She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her and loved her and stood beside her through every joy and sorrow. "You kept your promise, Ryder. You gave me a safe place until I could feel it for myself. And now, when I think about safety, I think about this. The ranch, the children, you, this life we built together." "We built it together," Ryder said, echoing his words from all those years ago. "Every piece of it. You are not the same woman who came here 13 years ago, Sara. You are stronger and fiercer and more beautiful. You became who you were always meant to be." "Because you love me enough to let me heal at my own pace," Sara said. "Because you never tried to fix me or rush me. You just stood beside me and believed I could do it myself. That is what love is," Ryder said simply. "Standing beside someone and believing in them, even when they cannot believe in themselves." They sat together as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple. Their children's laughter drifted on the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Sara thought about the long road that had brought her here, the loss and fear and grief, the slow, painful process of healing, the leap of faith it had taken to trust Ryder, to let him into her heart, to believe that safety was possible again. She thought about her father and how proud he would be to see the life she had built, the family she had raised, the woman she had become, and she thought about the words that had defined their courtship, the promise that had carried her through her darkest days. She had said she would never feel safe again. Ryder had said he would be her safe place until she felt it for herself. He had kept that promise, and more. He had not just given her a place to hide from the world. He had given her the strength to face it, the courage to heal, the love to believe in herself again. She was safe now, not because he protected her, though he would always do that, but because she had learned to be her own protector, her own source of strength, her own safe harbor. And she had learned that the strongest kind of safety was not found in walls or weapons or isolation. It was found in love, in partnership, in the courage to be vulnerable with someone who would guard that vulnerability as sacred. "I love you," she told Ryder, the words as true as they had ever been. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for keeping me safe. Thank you for loving me until I could love myself again." "Thank you for letting me," Ryder said, bringing her hand to his lips. "For trusting me with your heart, for building this life with me, for giving me a family and a home and a reason to wake up grateful every morning." They kissed as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their children playing nearby, the ranch settling into evening quiet around them. This was their happily ever after, not perfect, not without challenges or hard days or moments of fear, but theirs, built on trust and love and the unshakable knowledge that they would face whatever came together. Sara Kellerman Kane had come to this valley broken and afraid, certain she would never feel safe again. But she had found more than safety. She had found home. She had found love. She had found herself. And that was the greatest gift of all. The years continued to unfold with a gentle grace that Sara never took for granted. She and Ryder grew older together, their faces lined with years and laughter, their hands weathered by work and time. Their children grew into adults who made them proud, each one strong and kind and capable. Samuel took over the ranch when Ryder's back began to ache too much for the heavy work. He married a woman from Cedar Springs named Elizabeth, and they gave Sara and Ryder 3 grandchildren who ran wild through the valley just as their father had done. Rose became a teacher, opening a small school in town for the rancher's children, imparting not just knowledge, but wisdom and compassion. Thomas followed his namesake into law enforcement, becoming a deputy marshal who fought for justice with his father's steady determination and his mother's fierce heart. And Grace, their youngest, became a healer, learning medicine from the circuit doctor and bringing comfort to those who needed it. Sara watched her children build their own lives and felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with knowing they were good people who would make the world better just by being in it. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Ryder took Sara back to the porch where he had first held her while she cried, where he had promised to be her safe place. They sat in the same rocking chairs, now worn smooth by years of use, and watched the sun set over the valley they had made home. "Do you remember what you told me that first night?" Sara asked, her hand in his. "When I said I would never feel safe again?" "I remember every word we have ever said to each other," Ryder replied. "I told you I would be your safe place until you felt it for yourself." "You were," Sara said. "You were my safe place, and my strength, and my hope when I had none of my own. But you also taught me how to be those things for myself. That was the real gift, not just keeping me safe, but showing me how to keep myself safe, how to be strong enough to face whatever came." "You already had that strength inside you," Ryder said. "I just reminded you it was there." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after years of knowing someone so well that words are optional. The valley was peaceful in the fading light, the creek murmuring its eternal song, the wind sighing through the pines. "If you could go back," Ryder said eventually, "and tell that girl who came here 13 years ago one thing, what would it be?" Sara thought about it, remembering the frightened woman she had been, hollow-eyed and grief-stricken, certain her life was over at 22. "I would tell her that the worst thing that ever happened to her was not the end of her story," Sara said slowly. "I would tell her that she was going to survive, and more than survive, that she was going to build a life full of love and joy and meaning, that the pain would fade, but the strength she gained from surviving it would stay, that she was going to be happy again, even though she could not imagine it in that moment." "What would you tell her about me?" Ryder asked with a small smile. I would tell her that a man was coming who would keep every promise he made, who would love her with patience and kindness and unwavering faith, who would be her partner in every sense of the word, standing beside her through all of it. Sara squeezed his hand. I would tell her to trust him, to let him in, to believe him when he said she was worth loving because he was right. You made it easy to love you, Ryder said. Even at your most afraid, your most broken, there was something in you that called to me, a core of strength and goodness that no amount of trauma could destroy. I saw it the first night I came to your door in St. George, and I see it still. That part of you that refuses to give up, refuses to let the darkness win. You saw me, Sara said simply. When I could not see myself, you saw me. That was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, talking quietly about the years they had shared and the years still ahead. They talked about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and their plans for the future. They talked about aging and death and the promise they had made to each other to face whatever came together. When I die, Sara said, not morbidly but practically, I want to be buried here on the ranch, under the cottonwoods by the creek, with a simple stone that says, Sara Kane, beloved wife and mother, who learned to feel safe again. We will not talk about you dying, Ryder said, but his voice was gentle. Not for a long time yet. We all die eventually, Sara said, but I am not afraid of it anymore. I used to be after Papa died. I was terrified of losing anyone else I loved, of being alone again. But now I know that love does not end with death. Papa's love guided you to me. Your love will guide our children forward. It is all connected, all part of something bigger than any one of us. Ryder pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. You have become very wise in your old age, Mrs. Kane. I have had a good teacher, Sara replied, smiling against his shirt. They lived many more years together, growing old with grace and gratitude. They celebrated 50 years of marriage, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a sprawling family bound by love and legacy. They saw changes come to the territory, watched Utah become a state, watched the West grow tamer and more settled. But the ranch remained their refuge, the place where they had built their life together, the place where Sara had learned what safety truly meant, not the absence of danger, but the presence of love strong enough to face whatever came. When Ryder died at the age of 78, peaceful in his sleep after a long and well-lived life, Sara grieved deeply, but without despair. She had known this day would come. They had prepared for it together, talking honestly about death and legacy and what came after. She buried him under the cottonwoods by the creek with a stone that read, Ryder Kane, beloved husband and father, who gave freely and loved without measure. And she did not feel alone, because he had left her with so much. 4 children who loved her, 13 grandchildren who carried his kindness in their hearts, 23 great-grandchildren who had never known him but would hear his stories. And she had herself, the woman he had helped her become, strong and whole and safe in her own skin. Sara lived another 5 years after Ryder died, staying on the ranch with Samuel and Elizabeth, helping raise the youngest great-grandchildren, tending her garden, telling stories to anyone who would listen. She spoke often of Ryder, keeping his memory alive not with sorrow, but with joy and gratitude. On a warm spring morning, exactly 52 years after her father's death and exactly 50 years after her son Samuel's birth, Sara Kellerman Kane died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 79. She was buried beside Ryder under the cottonwoods, with a stone that bore the words she had chosen long ago. Her children gathered at the ranch for the funeral, and then her grandchildren, and then her great-grandchildren, until the valley was full of the family she and Ryder had created. They told stories of her strength and kindness. They spoke of the way she had faced tragedy and turned it into triumph. They passed down the lessons she had taught them about courage and resilience and love. And they talked about the promise Ryder had made all those years ago, when Sara was young and broken and certain she would never feel safe again. He had promised to be her safe place until she felt it for herself, and he had kept that promise, and in keeping it, he had given her the greatest gift imaginable. Not just safety, but the knowledge of how to create it for herself. Not just love, but the understanding of how to love herself. Not just hope, but the tools to build a future worthy of that hope. Sara Kellerman had come to the ranch afraid and alone. She had left it surrounded by love, having lived a life of meaning and purpose and joy. She had said she would never feel safe again. The cowboy had said he would be her safe place until she felt it for herself, and together, they had built something that would last long after they were both gone. A legacy of love and strength and the unshakable knowledge that even in the darkest times, healing was possible. That safety could be found again, not in running from fear, but in facing it with someone who believed in you. That was their story. That was their gift to the world. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.